Hi everybody, I'm Maddie, and this video is about the construction process of the Onella Blouse from the Sewciety website. It is a free pattern to download, and this video will be about some of the modifications I made and my journey in creating it. I used the Mood Marigold outside the box cotton twill fabric to make it. And I also watched quite a few wonderful videos on Billie's Sewing Corner, where she made quite a few different renditions of this blouse, and those were so helpful in figuring out some aspects of what I could change to make this fit me better. Some of that creator's tips and tricks were in creating the bow to be a different size, so that's one of the things that I did in my modifications, was to shorten the neckline quite a bit. I will be putting timestamps in the description of any time that I discussed any major changes I was making, and anything where I was discussing anytime I couldn't quite figure out the pattern matchup and things like that, because the website itself for the pattern does not have the most comprehensive instructions, so in some places I kind of did my best to elaborate on my process in creating it. I have also included a few more resources of other creators who have made this, and I found their rundowns quite helpful in my own construction. So anyways, this is the finished blouse, and I hope you enjoy the video. So I have started by cutting out all of my pieces yesterday. I think I used around 2 yards of fabric to make the smallest size. And then the first thing that it recommends that you do is sew the bust darts. So I've done that. And then you make the front plackets, because there are buttons and buttonholes in this. And now it doesn't call to interface it, but I did choose to interface it just to kind of maintain some structural integrity, so these plackets are interfaced. So now I'm on to the shoulder and side seams, and I'm going to do that with French seams, which the pattern does recommend you do. So that is my plan. So for French seams, I guess what you do, in a short explanation mostly to myself, is make it so that your seam allowance is going to be on the right side of your fabric. And then, so you sew that with half of the allotted seam allowance. So for this pattern, it calls for 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I will sew this with 1/4 inch. And then I'll trim it, and then I'll flip it so that the right sides are facing together instead of facing out, and then I will sew it again. So all of the raw edges will be hidden, or 1/2 inch total, so I'll sew that part again with 1/4 inch after trimming it, so that it will become the full 1/2 inch seam. So I do that for both sides and the shoulders, and I also will with the sleeves when it's time to do that. Okay. So I have sewed and trimmed these outside seams, and now I'm going to flip the garment inside out and sew it right sides facing, so that this teeny tiny, I think it is now about 1/8 of an inch seam, because it's trimmed, will be hidden on the inside. So here's the progress with everything. So plackets are done, darts are done, and everything is French seamed on the inside, and everything is pressed towards the back panel. So I have such nice neat seams on the inside now. And I think the next thing is to do the same to the sleeves. I love this fabric. This is a cotton twill from Mood, and I think it is just absolutely beautiful. Okay, so I have begun my second day of work by constructing my sleeves. So both of these sleeve pieces are French seamed the same way that the blouse is, bodice is. And I think, according to my directions that I kind of wrote from the website, the next thing I have to do is to gather the sleeves at the top edge between the V notches that are cut into it. So here and here. Okay, so these are gathered to down to about 3 inches between each V notch, which is what the pattern piece recommends. And now I have to set them into the bodice. This is a really tough sleeve to set, and I'm not entirely certain why, but I've had to gather it a little bit further and really, ouch, pin it in there. So I guess I'm going to stitch it up and see, because for me what's happening is the notches aren't lining up everywhere. If I were to try to line up the notches, I would get some weird bunching down at the underarm. But if I go by where the notches are, then the side seams don't line up. So I wanted to try to get a clean line there. So I just gathered it more, and I guess I will see what happens. Okay, I got this sleeve set on. I haven't pressed it or anything yet. But it all worked out eventually, but I'm sure the other one I'll have to gather down further as well. And I think I'm going to finish the inside of the seam just by zigzag stitching on the edges, instead of bias tape or anything like that. Look at these sleeves. I have a shirt on underneath. Look at these sleeves. They are set at a really nice height for my own shoulders. But look at that look at the volume. Serving Romulan chic. I wish I'd paid a little bit more attention to pattern matching on the underside of the sleeves with the grids and everything. But it has turned out pretty nicely so far. Okay, it is now Monday afternoon. I, this morning, finished a bunch of work for this week. So now I'm going to pretend I don't have 3 research projects to start, and I'm going to work on this blouse project again. So I think the next thing I have to do is make the sleeve cuffs and gather the bottom of the sleeve, and attach those before moving on to the tie, which I'm not sure if I'll do today or not. So I shall go get started. I have successfully, if you can call it that, done one of these cuffs already, but this is definitely the closest I would come to considering something just about impossible. So this is what the first one looks like. It's caught a couple of times, but it's mostly fine, and this part gets turned in, and I will probably hand stitch it just so that I don't have to put such a small opening under machine again to catch the raw edge, but it's just such a small area to work with, and it's like unthreaded the machine a couple times, so I'm just hoping to get through this, and then after that I have to hope that it gets over my hands and that the opening isn't too small. I don't think it will be, but I'll just kind of improvise, maybe add buttons or something if it does. I hope I don't have to do that though. Okay, so I've wrangled both of the cuffs through the machine, and then my plan to kind of fold it back and everything is just to fold it around and match up the side seams, of course, and then hand stitch it into place. I don't know what kind of stitch to use, but something that's kind of not going to be super visible from the outside. But then I just have to do it on this one as well. But that's what the finished cuff looks like before flipping it back to be tacked. The last thing I'm doing today was just to take the tie pieces and sew them together and press them along the back neck as they're supposed to be to get started. And I did preemptively shorten each tie because they start out what I would consider to be a little bit too long for me, who's kind of a small individual. So I cut it down so that it's just the collar portion, and then I took 10 or 12 inches off of the length of the ties themselves. Okay, so I have taken a few days to do some knitting and schoolwork and put a focus there and everything. So I haven't worked on this in a couple days, but the last thing I did was to slip stitch the cuffs into place and press the sleeves. And today, what's on my list is to pin the collar at back outsides and figure out the tie, I guess. So, without further ado, let's figure out the tie, I guess. So for collar assembly, the first thing you do is to attach the collar from back center down the front neckline and everything. And then the next thing you do is actually to stitch the ties around inside out. And then after those are stitched, which I haven't done yet, I've just pressed them into place, you then flip them inside or right sides out from there, and I'm sure press them again, of course, before probably hand slip stitching the turned up edge of the inside of the collar down again. So I'm gonna stitch those now. The only thing I haven't figured out is if you add the top of the placket in to the collar. I'm assuming you do, but I might have to ease it in or hand tack that down just to make sure that it's a nice smooth join. In this section, I'm just showing that I prepared the hem by folding it up once a 1/4 inch and ironing it, and then folding it the other 1/4 inch, pressing it again, and pinning it into place before I stitch. Okay, so I've just spent a good deal of time kind of learning how to buttonhole in the best way. My first few trials up here, all the way through my latest few on an interfaced piece. And now it's time to do this on the actual shirt. So what I've done is taken a shirt I like and made a guide, and then worked with the buttons that I'm going to be using, which are these, to find the correct size here, which for me I believe is a 5/8, which is 15 centimeters, and then I fit it to myself where my top button is going to go here. So my plan for that is to position this so that that will be the top button, and this is the guide I will use right down to the bottom of the shirt. And this is what would be on the full length, but it's not one. And I believe there's 2 5/8 inches or 65 centimeters between the bottom and top of each buttonhole. So after I do this, all I have to do is sew on the buttons and it'll be all done. Ouch.